Okay guys, today we're going to talk about volume of rectangular prisms with fractional edges. So we've already talked about finding the volume of rectangular prisms with whole number edges. So now we're going to talk about fractional edges. Okay, so number 1 says the blank of a three-dimensional figure is a measure of the amount of space it occupies. So this should be volume. Okay. Then number 2 says volume is always measured in, and we talked about this on Wednesday when we did whole number edges, and it's always measured in cubic units, which, if you remember, means that it is always the measurement cubed. Okay, then number 3 says you can find the volume of rectangular prisms with, and this would be fractional edges. Okay, so all that means is that the edges are going to contain fractions instead of whole numbers, or fractions and whole numbers. So if you look down here, you can see we have some fractions and some whole numbers. Okay, the formula for finding volume is, I'm going to let you answer this one. If you answered that volume equals length times width times height, you would be correct. Nothing has changed there. And then we have a reminder that we should always multiply fractions by multiplying the numerator, then multiply the denominators. And we should add an S here because it's numerators. Okay, so basically you're always going to multiply straight across. Nothing new there. We already know that. Okay, to multiply mixed numbers, change them to blank fractions first. What should we always change mixed numbers to? If you said improper fractions, you would be correct. We always want to make them improper fractions first. Okay, so we're going to start with this first figure here, and if we remember, this is a cube. Okay, so cubes are made up of square faces, so all the faces or the sides are squares, so that means that all the edges should be the same. So if the length is 1/3, the width should be 1/3 meters, and the height should be 1/3 meters. So if we're going to find the volume, we always want to write down our formula so we don't miss anything. So we should write volume equals length times width times height. And then we just need to plug in. So we don't know the volume, we're trying to find it. And our length is 1/3 times our width, which is 1/3, times our height, which is 1/3. Okay? So, like we said in number 5, when we multiply fractions, we multiply the numerators, then the denominators. So, the numerators would be 1 times 1 is 1, times 1 is 1. And actually, I'm going to write this down here at the bottom. So we want to continue with volume equals, and then we said 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. And now the denominators. So 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 is 27. Now the last thing that we cannot forget is our measurement, and then it's cubed. Because if you remember in number 2, we always, our volume is always measured in cubic units, which means the units are always cubed. Now make sure you don't cube the fraction. We're not cubing the number, we're cubing the units. It's the cubic units, okay? And the unit of measurement is meters, M for meters, okay? So we're also going to do number 2 together because this is a rectangular prism, so it's not a cube. They give us all 3 dimensions, okay? So our volume formula is volume equals length times width times height. So we want to keep the V for volume because we don't know it. Our length, you can say 1/2 or 1/4, either way. I'm going to do 1/4. Times the width, I'm going to do 1/2. Times the height of 2. Now what do we remember can go under 2 to make it a fraction? If you said 1 you are correct. Under all whole numbers, there's a 1. Because if we remember, a fraction represents division, and 2 divided by 1 is 2, a whole number of 2. Okay, so now we just have to multiply our numerators. So 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times 2 is 2, over our denominators multiplied will be 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 1 is 8. Now, we should always simplify as well if we can. So can we simplify 2 8s? If you said yes, you're correct, because we can divide both the numerator and denominator by 2, giving us 1/4. And the last step that we cannot forget is to put the units cubed. Okay, and I'm going to go back and circle this answer as well. All right. So there are the first two. So with these two examples, I want you to go ahead and try this one on your own. Okay, for this one, you should have wrote out that volume equals length times width times height. I should always see your formula written down. Okay, and then I don't know the volume, but I know the length is 4 1/2 times the width is 1 1/2, and the height is 1. Okay, so now if we look back at number 6 up here in our notes, we have to remember that to multiply mixed numbers, we change them to improper fractions first. So I hope that you took 4 1/2 and 1 1/2 and did the backwards C. So we should say 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9, so 9/2. And then you should say times 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3/2, or over 2, times, and then remember all whole numbers, just like in this one with 2, are over 1, because 1 divided by 1 is 1. Okay, so now we have to multiply our numerators. So 9 times 3 is 27, 27 times 1 is 27, 2 times 2 is 4, times 1 is 4. So now we should not leave it as an improper fraction. We should go ahead and make it a mixed number for our final answer. So our volume should equal 27 divided by 4, because a fraction's division. So how many times will 4 go into 27? You should say 6. 6 times 4 is 24, which leaves us with 3. So we have a whole of 6 with 3/4 left over. And then the last step is to put our centimeters, and they're cubed, because we're measuring in centimeters. Okay, so now we're going to flip over to the back, and on the back side, we're going to go through and do number 1 and number 3 together, and then I'm going to have you do 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7 on your own. So let's start with number 1. Number 1 says, what is the volume of a cube with the side length of 1/2? So we want the volume of a cube with the side length of 1/2 centimeters. Okay, so if we remember, a cube is made up of squares for the faces. So that would mean all the sides are 1/2. So that would mean our length is 1/2, our width is 1/2, and our height is 1/2. So if volume equals length times width times height, we plug in 1/2 for all of them. So 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. Okay, so the volume should equal 1 times 1 is 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. So it should be 1/8, and then we cannot simplify that. It's in the simplest form, so then it would just be centimeters cubed. We cannot forget our measurement cube. Do not forget that, or I will take off points, okay? Alright, and the last one we're going to do together is number 3. And it says, what is the volume of a rectangular prism with a length of 1 5/8 inches, a width of 3/8 inches, and a height of 3 inches? So if we remember, volume equals length times width times height. It tells us that our length is 1 5/8. Our width is 3/8. And our height is 3, and I'm going to go ahead and put it over 1. So now we have to take our mixed number, and remember from number 6 on the front, we want to make all mixed numbers improper fractions. So 8 times 1 is 8, plus 5 should be 13. So we're going to say 13 eighths times 3 eighths times 3 over 1. So now we have to multiply straight across on the numerator and then the denominator. So our volume is going to equal 13 times 3. Now I'm going to go to the side and do that because I can't do it in my head. So 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 1 is 3. And then that would be 13 times 3. So now we still have to do that product times 3. So it would be 39 times 3. So 3 times 9 is 27. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 2 is 11. So it should be 117 over 8 times 8 is 64 times 1 is 64. And now we should not leave it like that. So we need to know how many times can 64 go into 117. Okay, so we can't divide 1 by 64 or 11 by 64. We have to divide 117 by 64. Okay, so I'm just going to say 64 times 2, just to see if we can go 2 times, because 64 is not that far from 117. And so this would be 8, and this would be 12. So that is too big, so it would just go 1 time. And that would mean we subtract 64. Let me erase this. I did it in the way. Okay, so 1 times 64 is 64. So 7 minus 4 is 3. Make this 11, this 0. 11 minus 6 is 5. So it should be 1 and 53 over 64. And we cannot simplify 53 over 64. So we leave it as it is. And we have to always put our inches cubed because we're measuring in inches. So there's our answer. Okay, so now I want you to go through and do 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you that you're going to have to do a lot of multiplying over to the side and dividing, okay? But you can do it. Remember to make your mixed numbers improper fractions and just take it step by step, okay? Take your time. There's no rush. When you finish, bring this paper to me and I will check it for you. And then you can go ahead and work on your exit slip and get it turned in as well.